welcome everyone for coming out tonight. It shows a high level of engagement and community involvement, and we really appreciate everyone taking an interest in making our community better. Cedar Park Neighbors and the Baltimore Avenue Business Association, in conjunction with People Baptist, brought everyone here today to discuss the 5,000 block of Baltimore and the piece of 5100 to find out what you all would like to see happen in this community.
So I'd like to invite, so this is a collaborative effort between the Baltimore Avenue Business Association and Cedar Park Neighbors. Cedar Park Neighbors, we cover everywhere from the 52nd to 46th block up to Larchwood, and then south down to King Sesek. So, Cedar Park Neighbors has been kind of along the bottom, has been tracking, development and blight issues around this area for quite some time. Some of you guys may have been here when we had the Baltimore Avenue conversation throughout most of 2010. So you may have seen my face at that time as well. But Maureen Tate also the chair of the zoning committee, so I'm sure when zoning issues come up, you see her face as well, and Sean Markovich from that committee. So there's a lot of things that, we're an all-volunteer organization. We host these types of events. There's a ton of effort that Maureen and her group puts into all zoning issues which impact us on a day-to-day basis in the community. So there are some brochures floating around here on Cedar Park Neighbors. We encourage anyone who is not a member to please at least think about joining Cedar Park Neighbors. It's not a whole lot of financial commitment. I think it's $7 per person, $15 per household. So it's not a huge amount of our yearly budget that's gathered from membership, but it really is more about showing that we truly try and represent the diversity and complexity of our neighborhood. So, hope none of you are thinking about joining. So, to tonight's topic at hand. So, why are we here to begin with? So, I'm sure some, maybe not all, have heard about some discussions around development at 51st and Baltimore Avenue. So we had a meeting in mid-November where we invited what we would call stakeholders. This would be other community organizations, religious institutions, business owners on Baltimore Avenue to come out and meet to talk about some rumblings, some rumors that we were hearing on the street about potential development around 51st and Baltimore Avenue. And we had a very long conversation over all of 2010 about this whole block from 49th down to 52nd Street, really focused on Baltimore Avenue. Probably met with over 200-300, community members at the time to find out what people want. What's the kind of collective vision of what people want to see on Baltimore Avenue. So when we started to hear that there was some potential proposals, we're like, well, what's actually going on? We hadn't really heard much in the way of specifics. The City of Philadelphia and the Planning Commission, now we do have someone here tonight from the Planning Commission, just kind of observing tonight. They're not really here to speak because we don't have all of the various players from the city here tonight to represent different perspectives on that. But during 2012 and into the early part of last year, there was part of the overall city effort for evaluating community plans. So this Philadelphia 2035 planning effort that looked at what they call a University in Southwest District. And that covers a good portion of Cedar Park Neighbors boundary. So when that plan was published, probably in the summer, or late summer, early fall, June 2013. So summer of last year, June 2013. Some of the community, judiciously was reading through this and found, here we go, found that inside of this, and this isn't the Planning Commission so much, we just saw that, one, they were focusing on Baltimore Avenue as a redevelopment area. And part of that was because of the effort that the entire community put into the Baltimore Avenue conversation. There's actually quite a few things in that redevelopment plan from the Planning Commission that have very close parallels to what we had discussed many years ago. But part of that, it stated that there would be a blight recertification. So we're like, what is that? What is blight recertification? Of course, you know, we hear that, you know, Philadelphia, majority of the city was certified as blighted in the 60s, and then in the mid-90s, you know, various neighborhoods went through another recertification, saying that we're blighted. Whether or not we agree that we're blighted or not, it was stated that, you know, the blight recertification happened, and then there was some things that happened in 2005 with the streets program, with you know, utilization of city ordinances and eminent domain to kind of codify some of this blight recertification that was happening in various neighborhoods. It was kind of started pulling at this string. We heard that there was some plans potentially by the Baltimore Avenue Redevelopment Corporation, BARC, who owns and leases the Mercy Wellness Center, to potentially do something. We didn't know what, but we invited them to the meeting. We heard that, you know, this also involved the Redevelopment Authority, who really is in charge of blight recertification, eminent domain, property seizures. As part of that, Councilwoman's office and the Philadelphia Planning Commission to at least speak to this topic.
So, you know, while we're here, we'll acknowledge our elected officials. We have State Representative Roebuck and Desiree Jones from Senator Williams' office in attendance. If there's any other elected officials that I don't see or member of agencies, please raise your hands and we can give you acknowledgement. Okay.
All right. What organization is the gentleman over here from? Did you introduce yourself?
State Representative Roebuck.
Oh, Mr. Roebuck. Hi. Okay.
Super Bowl. So that's where we stand. So we have 2 blocks, 2 sides of the street that everybody's been trying to figure out what's going to happen. And part of what we're here to do is to get input and feedback and understand what the process is. There's been articles published, there's talk about eminent domain, and for those of you not in the loop, I brought a little information. Let's start off talking about what eminent domain is and what the RDA is. On October 2nd, 1945, the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority was created by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Urban Redevelopment Law of 1945. Its function was to acquire real estate using the power of eminent domain, plan for redevelopment, work with private firms, and finance the redevelopment by issuing municipal bonds of the authority with the overall objective of eliminating urban blight in Philadelphia. So that's what the RDA does. And when we talk about eminent domain, that comes through the power of the state constitution. And Article 1, Section 10 says, among other things, it makes it clear that private property shall not be taken or applied to public use without authority and just compensation being first made or secured. So that's what we're partially talking about, but then we're also talking about the people with individual land interests throughout the corridor. And the reason why people are here is because they want to make sure that if they have private land, whether it's BARC, whether it's SPAC group or whatever, they have the opportunity to develop it and make it serve the community before eminent domain comes in and takes their land. So I think that's in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, so there's 2 kind of takeaways we want to accomplish tonight. One is to kind of put out there all the things that we learned and heard at the November meeting. So I'm going to go into a little bit more specifics about each of those. And then beyond that is a discussion about, like, well, what do we look for in, say, a community process? You know, how do we hope to engage, whether it's the Councilwoman's office or the Redevelopment Authority or the Planning Commission? You know, what do we want as a community? Now, we understand that BABA and Cedar Park Neighbors we've got a little bit more homework to do, reaching out to the councilwoman and the PRA.
And we did reach out to the councilwoman, and she did let us know that she had a prior engagement. She could not be here tonight, but she will be attending the February 24th board meeting of the Cedar Park Neighbors and hopes of addressing this issue.
So at the November meeting, we got a little bit of clarity on what, at least things are happening on the planning commission side with the overall community plan, the redevelopment plan for this area. But we got a little bit more information from the PRA in terms of the blight recertification, and I think for some, we had some property owners there at the meeting. The more troubling thing was eminent domain. So some of you may have read recently about what's going on up in Mantua. I think it's a very close parallel to some of the concerns we have here, where the Creek Studios, African-American art studio that's been there for well over a decade, is in the midst of a fight right now with the city over having his warehouse studio claim the eminent domain to facilitate a larger grocery store build out in that neighborhood, which is really unfortunate because that neighborhood truly is what you would call a food desert. We don't have good options for fresh, healthy food availability in the neighborhood. But similar, not necessarily similar here, but there were concerns that the same thing may occur here. And what we found out is that there has been more recent legislation passed that sets a higher standard by which the redevelopment authority can claim land, but it really sounded like that did not apply because there was actually an ordinance passed in the city council in 2005 that very vaguely worded said that 20 to 24 properties on the 5,000 and 5,100 block of Baltimore Avenue was part of this kind of blighted certification. Didn't specify what, 20 to 24 properties were part of that, and it really negated any higher threshold that the PRA had to evaluate, like has it been recently purchased, is it currently up on its taxes, etc. Those things which now apply to more current qualifications for eminent domain didn't apply in this circumstance. So that was one thing that was troubling. The other thing is that they said, well, we do actually have a plan that's been proposed to us. Now, it's nowhere near concrete or funding wasn't really solidified for this. But Bart said, well, we have reached out to the PRA, and the PRA did say in an article recently written that about 6 months ago they were approached by Bart. They were evaluated, but it really isn't to any point of concrete conclusion that they have a plan that they would then bring back to the community. What Tracy with the PRA did say is that we are willing to entertain alternate proposals. And I think that's where we're trying to still find out, well, what does that mean? What's the process by which we would engage the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority to bring other proposals to the table, just as a starting point. But when Bart, and it was both Reverend Patterson from Hickman and Dr. Smallwood began to speak of this, there was two parts to their proposal. One was an expansion of the wellness center that was specifically looking at expanding the parking and taking the 4 vacant buildings there at the southeastern corner of 51st and Baltimore Avenue. This plan is taken from our Baltimore Avenue conversation from 3-4 years ago. So there's been some activity in the area since we've done this, but this is the corner in question.
You hold it up, maybe.
Yeah,
so here's the corner in question, Baltimore and 51st Avenue, and we have pictures of what that block looks like here. So there is the wellness center. Here are the 4 buildings in question. There's the parking lot for wellness, and then there's the vacant lot at the corner, which is privately owned at this point. So Bart was proposing to utilize eminent domain to get these 4 properties as part of their expansion. That's, in terms of like specifics of what they're looking at, that's the only thing we really concretely know from that meeting. They also said they were looking at student housing, which some of us caught us a bit off guard because we had our very long community process for talking about what needs were needed in the community. There was a lot of things talked about: affordable housing, senior housing, grocery store, hardware store, garden center, etc. But there was never a desire expressed to have student housing. If anything, we've always been hearing kind of a negative on the possibility of having student housing in this, and there wasn't a whole lot of specifics they could give to that, or what land they were really looking at to utilize for this. And I think more than anything, it's just, you know, we're concerned about making sure that we have a variety of options put out on the table that we as a community can talk about and hopefully have some say in terms of what would happen in this area. But
So are you saying that this plan for the parking lot of this expansion of universities is going to be decided by somebody other than who? I don't really understand.
well, now the PRA, when we heard back from Tracy at PRA on this, they did say that, you know, once they had a concrete plan, they would bring that back to the community and would solicit community input on that.
David, what is the PRA?
Sorry, PRA is the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority. It used to be just the RDA, but that's their new branding.
What about the vacant lot between 51st and 52nd and on 52nd?
The former, the bamboo lot?
20 lots.
The
Empty
bamboo lot?
lots between 51st and 52nd in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Just cleaned it off, just recently.
Well,
And down top at the corner of 52nd Street, there's empty lot there. I wonder what they're
There's a
going to do.
lot of history to that one. We've asked both the zoning committee, myself as the chair of development impact for Cedar Park, we've asked what is proposed to happen on that bamboo lot that was cleared out most recently. We've yet to hear anything about that. We've heard that the city owned property, so there's basically 3 large parcels that the city owns. The bamboo lot is one.
What about the 52nd Street?
See, the second, that's private land. The one that has the green trailer on it.
It's got the trailer. Right?
Oh yeah, that, man, we could probably have a whole story about that one. That was a former barbecue, you know, takeout place in the 80s, and we've had numerous rounds with the city, you know, legally fighting the person who owns that. And there's not been any activity on that, but I can tell you that the use that the gentleman's been trying to get happen on that since he lost his license in the 80s, it's now, it's gone through 2 rounds with the court system at the state level. Basically, he has no other avenue for having that first.
And as an aside, so for some of the lots, it's privately owned land, you know, so there may not be a plan for it because somebody owns the land and they're just not doing anything with it. And in some cases, there are people who, there are certain parcels that are owned by the city that nothing has happened with. So the ones that are owned by the city, we might be able to get direction from a city government agency to know what's going to happen. But the privately owned land, that's generally up to the person in the food market. Yeah.
So,
I have a question.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a question.
and there's a gentleman-
And no disrespect, you know, to the gentleman to 52nd Street. I see that this particular design has a specific proposal. So I'm interested in knowing, is there a developer who is right now trying to develop those specific properties? And where are we at on that? Not so much the speculation of these different organizations and who's coming in, who could do this or what. Is there a particular developer who wants to develop those properties right there?
Yeah.
I think that's the issue that we need to talk about as opposed to what we can do 5 years from now, 56 in Baltimore or 45th. Let's talk about these properties, right? Is there someone who wants to develop those properties right there?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of history to that, and even more recently, there are people who have wanted to develop those.
What happened to development that was taking place some months back in 2013 and 2013. Because they left a lot of material outside around
Okay,
that
so
lot.
you're talking about
Right, they
what's
started and
50,
they stopped.
20.
So was that private owned?
So some of you in the community may know.
Damn it, 5042.
5042. I'm not here to speak on behalf of Mari Bailey. He's the owner of that property. He is a community member, neighbor, owns two businesses on Baltimore, on 52nd Street. One which is now, and Algernon's not representing him, but Algernon's office is in his former Route 52 Cafe that's on the southwest corner.
Well, prior to this meeting, we also had a meeting discussing eminent domain. So put it back up on the market because of this discussion. But to get to his question, what you were saying, like if they already proposed something, is it that they bring it to us and this is what's going to happen, or who's in the middle of the communication to say, okay, this is what's being proposed before it gets to the point where you're telling us about it because you already have a developer that has his eyes on it, so then they're already in the process of making this happen.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do.
And it's one of the issues that in order for them to develop these properties, do they need the power of eminent domain? Because I see you explaining that, and I'm not against eminent domain, I understand the use of it. But my question is there a specific development for it? And do we need eminent domain? And I think we need to discuss it.
Well, I know that there have been business owners, community members in the past that have bought these buildings and have started their own individual efforts on one singular property. But because of the threat of eminent domain, when this council ordinance got passed in 2005, some who are, long-term members of the community recall like specific, proposals that individual property owners had for this that ultimately they threw out the window because they were afraid that they were going to lose their shirt on it because.
Is it the wellness center that you're talking about? Other words, no, I'm saying this here. If the wellness center was that whole block, what's to stop them from buying? If it's all right properties there, privately owned or city owned, you buy it.
Right,
that's the way the Nutter administration has it set up. So they buy it. What's going to stop?
The
part is if it's privately owned, you buy it and it goes through. It looks like what you're saying is that say the wilderness center. If it's the wilderness center, then the wilderness center want to expand. They're going to expand.
And they could very well go through private acquisition, buying up these properties. But that's different than the city.
Maybe I'll have to explain it.
Right, and what the bill is saying there is would be the ideal solution if there was a free market or, when the developer wanted to buy these properties and they could negotiate a deal that was the proper terms for everybody involved. That would be the ideal solution. It would be the quickest solution for development. And I'm just talking from a development standpoint. If you want to expand, you work a deal with this guy, and this guy, and then you're done. It's probably the fastest way to do it. That's up to each individual person who owns these properties. We can't force them to it's America, you can't force them. So
well, you can force
as people in the free market, you can't force them. But the eminent domain process can force a person's hand within certain parameters. So that is what the threat is, and when they started developing, the developers of these smaller properties felt they were threatened, not threatened by anything besides the market or by the threat of eminent domain.
Well, excuse me, I'm right across the street from that particular property. Are you saying that they're not doing anything with it?
Yeah, Mari, but that's going back up
Well, I think we need to be very clear in stating that recently there has been several activity in that specific lot that we're talking about, transaction, land that had been sold by private investor who bought land. So it's not like the land is sitting there and there's no activity. People are trying to buy the land at free market, but the city is forcing, this eminent domain, using that as an umbrella to do something that's not productive for the neighborhood. And that's what I think should be addressed, and that's what I'm personally here to hear more about, but there has been recent activities. I'm one of those people who's bought properties, 2 lots, to directly across from it recently. I'm very concerned with the fact that the city is telling us as investors what they're going to put in our neighborhood. That's not fair.
Yeah, but you got to be, my name's John Ellie, and I'm with the, I guess we're with the West Baltimore Avenue Civic Association. And we're also with another group that I didn't hear you mention, Southwest Philadelphia District Services, who represented fully knows about us. And I'm also here representing one of the biggest businessmen in this area, Frankie Flowers, from the funeral home across the street. The question is, I just didn't hear any factual information, right? And when you start throwing stuff out there about eminent domain, that's all rumor stuff. If you would have taken, it's a rumor now because we don't have the facts. You can't tell me about a threat unless you tell me some steps it's taken. This young man asked you if there was a plan submitted to the RDA.
Yes.
You didn't answer. Well, if it was a plan, the community has a right to see, once it's submitted to an agency, it triggers the right to know. The community simply could have asked the council person or the state rep to get a copy of the plan. Then we would have had the plan.
Well, we invited him.
Let me have my time to speak. I'm not against you. I just want to get some facts. When we start talking about eminent domain, that's all threat stuff. And there's a hierarchy to be followed. If it's the private market, if private market buyers and sellers are exchanging offers, there's nothing you can do about that. The things that we can address is the city-owned stuff. Now, those of you who have been following the land bank bill, that's really just working its way through. If you factually have asked the authority, the redevelopment authority, what's their plan submitted? Has it been submitted to the board yet? That's the stuff we need to know. If so, give you a copy of it. Then we could be discussing some factual stuff. When you start talking about, you speak for the community, reach out to everybody in the community. In your area that you said, down in King Sesson, which is clearly our area, did you flyer that area? We just happen to know this because one of our members is next door. So just going forward, I mean, this seems like the basis of a great meeting. We just don't have the facts. This seemed like a lot of speculation. And it simply could have been achieved by talking to our elected official, State Representative Robeck, getting some information or a representative from the councilwoman's office to come here and give the community some factual information.
They didn't come.
Well, you can't say they didn't come if you didn't give us enough. Look, I'm not the enemy. I'm just saying, look, if we're an informed community of citizens, then we have elected officials who answer to us. That this stuff, how many of you have attended Redevelopment Authority board meetings? I go there regularly. If you go there, you know everything submitted to them is there for the public. The agenda is there for the public. If there's a project manager, if a plan was submitted, you can get a copy of the plan. They will help you, give it to you. So all we have to do is reach out to them and get that.
Can I read you something, if you don't mind? This is from an email from the Redevelopment Authority. I'm going to read this right off my phone. Okay? This is the second paragraph of the email.
Do you want to say who you are, maybe?
I'm sorry. My name is Ryan Spack. I live in Cedar Park, 51st in Springfield. I own 2 of the parcels on the block that's in question. I was in attendance at the meeting when we called PRA and asked the Planning Commission and the Councilwoman's office to attend a meeting with the business owners because we weren't really sure exactly what we were dealing with. So we came to this meeting. We had no idea what was going to be discussed. In our meeting, we were discussing the flight certification. I will in a moment. So I'm giving you some backstory so you understand where this email comes from. We did not know that we were going to be told that eminent domain was going to be a part of this process. We were questioning why it was being recertified as blighted if it had already been certified as blighted. What was the need for the recertification if it already existed? That was the question that was proposed. We invited them to a community meeting at Cedar Works at 49th and Pentridge. They came willingly, and it was disclosed at that moment, at that meeting, that there was a proposal by BARC. It was confirmed by BARC when the president of BARC stood up and actually said, there is a proposal. We knew nothing about student housing until he opened his mouth. We knew nothing about the expansion of the Wellness Center until he said something to the business owners of Baltimore Avenue and to the landowners that have land and property on that particular block that's in question. So we started the question, what was this all about? How serious was it? How did a proposal get placed in the RDA and not get put out to us as community members? How did people that recently bought land on that block, like myself and my family, a year ago, how did we not get notification that this was a proposal? How did other investors not get a chance to put a proposal out? So I'm going to read you an email from the RDA. This is the second paragraph of this email. While BARC has presented plans for the 5,000 and 5,100 blocks of Baltimore Avenue to the Planning Commission, we have not seen any evidence of financing for those plans. Of the 2 blocks, development on the 5,100 block is more realistic, but development for the 5,000 block is not out of question. With all due respect, sir, the reason we haven't seen a proposal is because we caught them with their pants down long before this process has ever become public.
Well, you didn't say you had it, they didn't have a proposal.
No, they said they have a proposal with no concrete financing
Well,
plans.
why didn't you get somebody, you know, you really should be up here because you're.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm a community member, it's not my opinion.
Yeah, but you are a community member, but you are a developer and you're an interested party because you own those parcels you want to develop. So what we should have done was ask the redevelopment authority to send a representative here. Because I'm not that.
I made the client to come.
Well, then what's the next step to do is ask your elected official.
We did.
Well, then hold them accountable. Don't just talk about speculation.
I think what needs to be done, Mr. Speck, with all due respect, but I would like to hear your ideal for the development of this area because blight removal is important and this certification of blight. Listen, blight, crime, blight. We're not even going to talk about it. The whole city needs to be developed. Wherever there's a crime at, we should just develop that area and the crime will remove itself. I agree with you, but I used to see developers up front say, this is my plan for Baltimore Avenue, and what do y'all think? Not so much, like I'm hearing a lot of rhetoric, but I want you to be telling me, what do you think we should build over there, and how is it going to improve the neighborhood, and then we should be saying yes or no.
Okay, so to that answer, so for myself, I can answer that question. We put a proposal out a year ago to put a garden center on that land. A garden center.
What's a garden center?
A garden center sells plants, sells soil. The plan was to meet the needs and desires of the community, which was what came out of the Baltimore Avenue conversation, what, 2.5 years ago?
Right.
Yeah, I think it was like number 6 or 7 on the list.
Okay, so what's the problem?
The problem was a multitude of issues that I won't go into necessarily that surrounded this eminent domain that caused the folks that we were going into a lease agreement with that were going to have a 5-year lease to put a garden center on this parcel, caused them to say no.
Ryan, are you saying on your parcel?
Yes.
Yes, so your own property, the people you were going to lease it to were scared away by the threat of eminent domain.
Okay. And so I will respond to say that the long-term plans for this parcel don't exist yet because our plans for the last 5 years that was from hopefully what would have been this March for 5 years out would have been a garden center. And so for us, our goal was to drive traffic up the block. More eyes, more ears.
So who's holding the hammer of eminent domain?
So that's
you can't develop Baltimore Avenue because of eminent domain. If somebody stand up and say, I'm the villain, the villain is not here.
It would be very easy for all of us to be able to point a finger and say to somebody, you're the bad guy, we need to go after you. But the reality of the situation is, it's way more complicated than that. And where we stand now as a community is we get the opportunity to focus our energies long before the proposal actually comes to us for zoning, for any other questions. They don't technically need us to pull off eminent domain. But the beauty of us being in this position now as a community versus Mantua is we have the opportunity to make this conversation ours long before the proposal ever gets solidified with finances. And so we're here today, regardless of whether city officials want to show up, you know, shame on them for not being there.